When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, Hoot. User, dspacealt. Posted, April 10th, 1997.
All my life, my dad has been a prankster, and it's such a pain. Mom says he used to be worse, so I guess I've got that to be grateful for. He's never been cruel to us or anything like that. It's just the jokes. Or at least what he thinks are jokes. When I was 8, he would move my Raggedy Ann doll around at night. From my bedroom to the living room, from the living room to the spare room. This went on for months, and each time he'd tell me it was because she worked the night shift at a chocolate factory. Why a chocolate factory? I couldn't tell you, and I doubt Dad could either. All this should give you some sense of the man my father is, and help you understand why, when I first heard the hooting, I thought it had to be him. My grandfather passed away last winter, leaving us the land in Okfuskee County where my mother grew up. The property is about an hour away from our house in Tulsa, 25 acres of tangled black walnut and pecan trees, partially adjacent to Buckeye Creek. Earlier that year, I had finished high school, and with a year before I could leave for college, I was more than a little worried my parents would want to move out there. Thankfully, Mom and Dad decided a 2-hour commute every day wasn't a worthwhile sacrifice to save a little on property tax each year. Instead, Mom and I volunteered to stay at the farm as long as we needed to sort out Grandma and Grandpa's things. This was pretty cool for me because Grandma had died before I was born, and after that, Grandpa never wanted anyone to visit him, preferring to come into the city to see us. This would be my first ever visit to their house. We left home on a clear, cold Saturday morning in a convoy of 2. Me, Mom, and my dog Sandy in the lead, Dad bringing up the rear. The highway rolled past beneath us, taking us from flat farmland outside Tulsa to a stretch of densely overgrown forest that crowded in around the road, giving it an oppressive feel. Right away, I had 2 bad feelings. 1, that something was watching us, and 2, this had to be Grandpa's land. The second theory was proven correct when Mom slowed down at the same time as I spied a gravel driveway to the left, just wide enough for a truck to pass through. Being inside the forest did nothing to alleviate the dread I felt, and despite the sunshine, I jumped when a bare walnut branch scraped talon-like across my window. Sandy jumped too, giving me a look that suggested she wasn't any happier about the situation than I was. It only took a minute or so of driving to get through the trees, after which the land flattened out and I could see Grandpa's house. It was beautiful, practically a storybook farmhouse painted deep red, something Mom said he had done every summer, including this past one. Beyond the house, I could see 2 fair-sized outbuildings, also painted red, which Mom identified as barns. Grandpa's neighbors had kindly kept the driveway and parking area in front of the porch plowed, allowing us to pull in close. Dad in the truck wasn't far behind. Our plan was to get started over the weekend, with him leaving the truck for us when he went back into town on Sunday night. Mom and I brought the groceries in, while Dad carried snowy armfuls of wood for the stove. Once the fire was lit, the three of us began wandering from room to room like we were touring a museum devoted to mid-20th century rural American living. Sandy was less interested in the tour than we were, ignoring everything except for a patch of living room floor just inside the front door, from which she could see the snow-covered yard. The heaviness that had been with me since I'd first seen the trees stuck around, but the minutia of Grandma and Grandpa's lives was so interesting that I all but forgot about it. On a shelf in the living room, there was a music box Mom said Grandpa had brought back from the war, one of the last surviving pieces of a bombed-out house his unit had come across in the French countryside. In the mudroom was a heavy cedar chest containing Mom's baby blanket, soft and green, made for her by her own grandmother. This is how we spent the afternoon and first part of the evening, buried in the past. I didn't even notice when Dad wrapped his arms around Mom's shoulder, steadying her, but seeing it helped dispel the gloom I'd felt since arriving. Around 6, Mom called a halt to the exploration for the time being, her eyes moist. She offered to make dinner if I would take Sandy for a walk. Sandy perked up at the word, then cast a suspicious glance outside. I was sympathetic. The sun was long gone, and beyond the halo of lights surrounding the house was a black void where the countryside should be. Still, I clipped the leash onto her collar and held open the door, which she grudgingly stepped through. Outside, the night sky was imposingly large, stars glittering like chips of ice. My breath steamed in front of me as I stepped down off the porch and into the soft crunch of new snow. The neighbor had used Grandpa's plow to clear the snow, leaving a wide path back to the barns where it was stored. Sandy and I followed it, leaving the safety of the house lights behind us. Before I go any further, I should clarify that I'm no stranger to the quiet and dark. While I like to say we live in Tulsa, we actually live in a suburb on the city's outskirts where nighttime traffic is all but non-existent. Silence doesn't bother me. The silence on Grandpa's farm was a different story altogether. It wasn't just an absence of sound, instead seeming to swallow it up. Sandy's panting, my own footsteps all seemed to disappear once they were arm's length away. The closer we got to the barns, the more my eyes adjusted to the dark, a useful thing until the motion sensor lights switched on and nearly blinded me. Even Sandy let out a little bark at the sudden change in our surroundings. That one bark was joined by a second, fiercer one, which deepened into a growl. I tried to block out the glare, squinting to see what had gotten her so worked up. Next to the barn, just for an instant, I saw what looked like an owl the size of a person, and not a small one. I gasped, opening my eyes in shock and temporarily blinding me. Dots surged into my vision, and I tried to rub them away so I could look again. Sandy's growling increased in volume. I felt her tugging at the leash, threatening to pull it clear out of my hand. When I was able to open my eyes again, only seconds later, the owl, or whatever it had been, was gone. I hightailed it back to the house. My parents were, shall we say, respectful, but skeptical. Mom suggested the motion light had startled me, and I'd misidentified the trees behind the barn as something sinister. Dad, of course, announced that we had discovered the Yakfuski Owlman and were going to be rich. Both annoyed me for different reasons, though I have to admit that the light and warmth of the house had me questioning my judgment. Maybe it had been my imagination. If so, why did Sandy get so worked up? We spent Sunday gaming out how the cleaning was going to go, which rooms would be empty and in which order. Would there be a pile for things to donate and for things to sell, or just a donation pile and a junk pile? Deliberations around questions like these kept my mind too occupied to think much about the night before, at least until late afternoon when the shadows began to lengthen. Once full dark came, the Owlman became all I could think about. Sandy, too, changed as night drew in. She went back to guard duty, sitting in the same patch of floor by the front door. When it came time for her walk, we were equally reluctant to go, and Dad's admonition to watch out for the Yakfuski owl didn't help. Outside, it wasn't as cold as it had been the night before, the sky hidden behind clouds. Fat snowflakes floated down, soaking everything they came in contact with. Instead of going toward the barn, I made an executive decision to trudge a path through what looked like reasonably shallow snow off to the right of the house. The biggest downside to my new route was that it brought us closer to the trees surrounding the house. In the half-light, their branches looked like spider webs outlined in white. The low hum of apprehension I'd felt since arriving hadn't ever really gone away, spiking with the previous night's incident at the barn, then ebbing until it lingered at the edge of my awareness like a phantom headache. We were underneath the canopy of branches when it spiked again, flaring into brilliance like the barn lights. Sandy stopped dead, a growl building in her throat. It was then I heard the hooting. It was ridiculous because this didn't sound like a real owl. It sounded like a man doing a poor imitation of what he thinks an owl sounds like. Another hoot so poorly disguised I would have giggled if not for the sourness in my belly and the snarl on Sandy's face. You had to give Dad credit, I thought. He'd managed to sneak out ahead of us without me hearing. That was some achievement given how quiet it was out there. I called him, complimenting his ninja skills and telling him he could come out. There was a moment of silence, then more hoots, closer than before. Again, I called out to him, louder this time. The hooting drew nearer, and there was the sound of footsteps in new snow from inside the tree line. Sandy was barking now, pulling at her leash like she wanted to sink her jaws into something before it could do the same to her. I decided to be angry instead of admitting how scared I was. I started shouting into the dark, telling Dad he was being a real asshole. A moment later, I heard the house's screen door bang open far behind me and my father's voice calling my name. The next hoot was so close, I should have been able to see someone or something, but it was just Sandy and I. She was losing her mind. Behind me, Dad called my name again, his voice closer this time. Another hoot. His footsteps were faster. He was running, telling me to step back. Why would I step back, I wondered. Dad's hand gripped my shoulder, yanking me away, Sandy yelping as she was pulled along too. The contact was like having cold water splashed on my face, and I could suddenly see what Dad had been shouting about. There, just feet from me at the edge of the forest shadow, was the Owlman I'd seen the night before. For an instant, his eyes glittered like distant stars. Then he was gone.
Subject, new in town. User, XP0NW. Posted, May 12, 1997.
As far as my kids were concerned, moving to Seattle was never a popular decision. My wife Priscilla understood I had no control over the situation, that my job paid the bills and the corporation, in all its wisdom, had decided to transfer me. The PNW branch was bleeding red ink, they said. Someone had to right the ship. Transitioning everyone in my family from the light and heat of Phoenix to the cool gray mists of Seattle-Tacoma was never going to be easy. I knew that. Scylla and I did what we could to prepare, from researching schools to find local analogs of the hobbies our daughters Jennifer and Molly enjoyed. When the big day finally came, we felt reasonably prepared to start our new lives. The intangibles of the situation are what tripped us up. For example, we knew the weather would be grayer here than back home, but no one could have anticipated the windstorm that hit in January. We had hung back in Phoenix to spend Christmas with our families and move the first week of the year. Less than 2 weeks later, the girls watched in horror as the 520 bridge was continually lashed with waves bigger than any they've ever seen. We'd see later on the news that both Lake Washington bridges had been swamped. It was Inauguration Day, and we had been invited to a party at a coworker's place, kind of a themed get-to-know-you thing, but with the bridges out of commission, we'd had to abort the plan. Instead, to try and distract the girls, Priscilla and I thought we'd take them to the Luna Park Cafe, which we'd found on a family walk around the neighborhood the week before. Wouldn't you know it, it was closed too. The storm had busted a skylight, shutting it down for what turned out to be 3 days. The other intangible, one Scylla and I are hoping to keep from the girls, at least for now, is that the house is haunted. I know what you're thinking, and I used to think it too. Hauntings are bullshit. None of it is real. As someone whose job depends on concrete, measurable numbers, I'm sympathetic to anyone who believes the entire world can be boiled down to what we see before us. Thing is, I've now seen enough to know my definition of reality has been way too narrow. First off, I should say that this is real life and not some horror movie, so we haven't been living through poltergeist or anything like that. It's been more subtle. Unnerving, but subtle. I think I was the first to see anything. Righting the ship has turned out to be a long, agonizing process because some people at the branch benefited from things being broken. Consequently, I've had more late nights at the office than I'd like. On one of those late nights, I came home to a sleeping household. Scylla had left my dinner in the oven, so I took it out, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down on the sofa to watch a little TV while my brain untwisted itself. When I sat down, Letterman had just started. He was partway through his monologue when I saw in the reflection of the screen what looked like someone standing behind me. Thinking Scylla or one of the girls had woken up, I turned around only to see an empty living room. A few minutes later, it happened again, except this time I knew for sure I had seen movement in the glass, and when I spun around, I caught it. A flash of black vanishing around the corner into the rear hallway. I set aside my half-finished dinner and got up to investigate. The hallway was empty. The back door, which was the only place it led, securely locked. It was baffling. In the days to come, I'd see that reflected figure again and again in screens, mirrors, and windows, always fleeting but unequivocally there. Priscilla started to see it as well and brought it up one night before bed. We decided that since it wasn't threatening, We would keep an eye on it and reassess after a few weeks. Jennifer saw something tonight, though, and if she keeps on seeing things, we're going to have to make a move. I was in the kitchen helping Scylla clean up after dinner when Jen came into the room. She wanted to know why her mom had kept walking past the bathroom's open door while she was in there. If she needed to get in, all she had to do was ask. We both couldn't stop the momentary look of confusion from showing on our faces, and Jen looked freaked out. I could see her mentally taking stock of how deep into the dishwashing we were and trying to match up the timeline with what she'd seen. Priscilla, bless her, is much faster on her feet than I am and jumped right into improv mode. She said she had been looking for something and hadn't wanted to distract Jen from curling her hair. It wasn't the best explanation, but something I've learned about the world is that people want to believe. It's easier to accept the unlikely, even ludicrous explanation rather than open yourself up to infinite, terrifying possibilities. I watched our daughter's face show exactly this struggle before accepting the story as given. You could almost see the gears clicking into place before she nodded, satisfied, and walked back into the living room. We dodged a bullet, but this was an escalation. We're currently working out a plan to list the house before the girls catch on that we're not the only ones living here.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.